What if I told you that the money in your wallet stopped being real 52 years ago? On August 15th, 1971, President Richard Nixon severed the dollar's link to gold. Since that moment, the only thing backing your currency has been a promise, not gold, not silver. A promise backed by oil. The Petrodollar system was born in secrecy, engineered in desperation, and sold to you as stability. But here's what they didn't tell you. The system has an expiration date, and that date is approaching faster than anyone in power will admit. This isn't speculation. This is mathematics. The same mathematics that destroyed the Portuguese real in 1580, the Dutch guilder in 1720, and the British pound in 1931. Every reserve currency in history has followed the same pattern, the same 7 stages. And right now, in 2025, the United States has entered stage 6. The final stage approaches. Let me show you exactly how we got here, why the collapse is inevitable, and what happens when the world's reserve currency dies. Stage 1. The ascension 1945 to 1971. Every empire begins the same way. Productive capacity, manufacturing dominance, trade surpluses that flood the world with your currency because the world needs what you make. In 1945, America emerged from World War II controlling 50% of global GDP. The Bretton Woods Agreement made this official. The dollar became the world's reserve currency, backed by gold at $35 per ounce. Every other currency was pegged to the dollar. The dollar was pegged to gold. The system was elegant, simple, and doomed. Why doomed? Because Bretton Woods contained a fatal flaw. You cannot run perpetual trade deficits while promising gold convertibility. You cannot finance wars in Korea and Vietnam, build a welfare state, and maintain a fixed gold price. Physics doesn't allow it. Economics doesn't allow it. Yet America tried. By 1970, foreign central banks held $45 billion in dollar claims. The U.S. gold reserve, $10 billion. The math was simple. If foreign governments demanded conversion, the United States would default. France, under Charles de Gaulle, understood this. They began converting dollars to gold at an accelerating rate. The gold window was about to shatter. Stage 2. The desperation 1971-1973. On August 15th, 1971, Nixon closed the gold window. He called it temporary. It was permanent. The world panicked. For the first time in history, the global reserve currency was backed by nothing but faith in the U.S. government. Within months, currencies began floating against each other. Inflation spiked. Oil prices quadrupled during the 1973 Arab oil embargo. The dollar's value was collapsing. Foreign finance ministers gathered in emergency sessions. The Smithsonian Agreement of December 1971 attempted to salvage fixed exchange rates by devaluing the dollar by 8% against gold and allowing wider trading bands. It failed within 14 months. By March 1973, all major currencies were floating freely. The Bretton Woods system was dead. But here's what the history books miss. Nixon's decision wasn't a choice. It was a mathematical inevitability. By August 1971, foreign central banks held $60 billion in dollar claims against $10 billion in U.S. gold reserves. A 6-1 mismatch. If even 20% of foreign dollar holders demanded conversion, the United States would default. The Nixon administration needed a solution. Fast. Not just any solution. A mechanism to create artificial demand for dollars without gold backing. Enter the In 1974, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger flew to Jeddah to meet Saudi Crown Prince Fahd. The negotiations were conducted in absolute secrecy. No congressional oversight. No public announcement. The terms were elegant in their simplicity. Saudi Arabia would sell oil exclusively in US dollars and invest surplus revenues in US Treasury bonds. In exchange, the United States would provide military protection, arms, sales, and guaranteed support for the House of Saud. The Saudis agreed. Other OPEC nations followed. By 1975, the petrodollar system was operational. Overnight, global oil demand became dollar demand. Every country needed dollars to buy energy. Japan needed dollars. Germany needed dollars. France needed dollars. The dollar regained its dominance not through productive capacity, not through gold backing, but through energy monopoly. The system worked flawlessly for 50 years. But every system built on coercion eventually faces resistance, and the cracks would begin appearing within a generation. Stage 3. The peak. 1980 to 2000. This was the golden age of American financial hegemony. The petrodollar allowed the United States to run unlimited trade deficits without consequence. Why? Because foreign countries needed dollars to buy oil. Those dollars were recycled into U.S. Treasury bonds, financing American consumption and military expansion. It was a perfect closed loop. America printed dollars. The world bought oil with those dollars. Oil exporters invested those dollars back into U.S. debt. America printed more dollars. The cycle reinforced itself. The benefits were extraordinary. Americans enjoyed the highest standard of living in history. Cheap imports flooded in from Asia. Gasoline remained affordable even as global demand soared. Credit was abundant and cheap. The world subsidized American consumption because they had no choice. They needed dollars to power their economies. This is what economists call exorbitant privilege. France's finance minister, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, coined a term in the 1960s. It meant the United States could print its own currency to pay international debts, while other nations had to earn dollars through trade surpluses. America didn't have to produce, it just had to print. The numbers tell the story. Between 1980 and 2000, the U.S. trade deficit grew from $25 billion to $400 billion annually. Manufacturing employment fell from 19 million to 17 million workers, even as population grew by 50 million. Entire industries moved overseas. Steel mills in Pittsburgh closed. Textile factories in North Carolina shuttered. Auto plants in Detroit went silent. But Americans didn't feel poorer. They felt richer. Why? Because cheap Chinese goods replaced expensive American-made products. A television that costs $800 in 1985 costs $300 in 2000. Clothing prices fell 20%. Electronics became disposable. The illusion was perfect. Declining wages masked by declining prices. Meanwhile, the financial sector exploded. In 1980, finance represented 5% of U.S. corporate profits. By 2000, it represented 40%. Wall Street replaced Main Street as the engine of American wealth. The productive economy was being replaced by a financial economy. Wealth was no longer created through manufacturing. It was extracted through debt, speculation, and financial engineering. The empire's foundation was hollowing out, but the surface gleamed with prosperity. The stock market reached record highs. Real estate prices soared. The Washington Consensus promised that globalization and financial liberalization would lift all boats. The shift from stage 3 to stage 4 was beginning, but no one in power recognized it. Stage 4 ante crack, 2000 a 2008, in 2000. Saddam Hussein announced Iraq would begin selling oil in euros, not dollars. 18 months later, the U.S. invaded Iraq. In 2003, Iraq switched back to dollars. In 2009, Muammar Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed African currency to replace the dollar in African oil trade. 2 years later, NATO forces toppled his government. Libya returned to dollar-based oil sales. These weren't coincidences. They were warnings. The petrodollar system requires enforcement. When countries attempt to escape, the empire responds with military force. But military force is expensive, and enforcement becomes impossible when challengers are too large to invade. Enter China and Russia. Stage 5. The Defiance 2008 to 2020. The 2008 financial crisis shattered global faith in American financial management. The Federal Reserve printed $4 trillion to bail out banks. China and Russia watched the dollar's purchasing power evaporate and began planning alternatives. In 2010, China and Russia began settling bilateral trade in their own currencies, bypassing the dollar entirely. In 2015, China launched the China International Payment System (CIPS), a direct competitor to SWIFT, the Western-controlled financial messaging system. In 2017, China opened a yuan-denominated oil futures market in Shanghai. The defiance accelerated. In 2019, Russia reduced its dollar reserves by 50%, converting to euros, yuan, and gold. Saudi Arabia, America's closest petrodollar partner, began accepting yuan for oil sales to China. The system that Henry Kissinger built in 1974 was fracturing. Then came the weapon that would destroy it entirely. Stage 6. The Sanctions 2020-2025 in February 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine. Within days, the United States and the European Union froze $300 billion in Russian central bank reserves. For the first time in history, a major power's dollar reserves were confiscated. The message to every non-Western country was clear. Your dollar reserves are not yours. They are hostages, and if you cross the United States, they will be seized. The reaction was immediate. Central banks around the world began diversifying away from the dollar. Gold purchases hit record highs. China, India, Brazil, and South Africa accelerated dedollarization efforts. BRICS nations announced plans for a common currency to compete with the dollar. But what no one in Washington understood was that sanctions work through network effects. The dollar's power comes from universal acceptance. When you weaponize the dollar, you incentivize alternatives. Every country watching Russia's reserves get frozen asked the same question. Are we next? The trust that holds the petrodollar system together was shattered. Not by military defeat, not by economic collapse. By policy, the United States sanctioned itself out of reserve currency status. Stage 7. The collapse, 2025-2003X. This is the stage we're entering now. The signs are undeniable. Saudi Arabia's 50-year petrodollar agreement with the United States expired in June 2024. They did not renew it. For the first time since 1974, Saudi Arabia can sell oil in any currency. They are already accepting yuan, rupees, and euros. China has become the world's largest oil importer. They are settling nearly 25% of their oil purchases in yuan. Russia, Iran, and Venezuela, all under U.S. sanctions, are selling oil exclusively in non-dollar currencies. The petrodollar's monopoly is ending. The Federal Reserve's response: print more dollar. Since 2020, the money supply has increased by 40%. Inflation has destroyed purchasing power. The national debt has surpassed $36 trillion, 120% of GDP. Interest payments on that debt now exceed $1 trillion per year, more than the defense budget. This is the endgame of every reserve currency. Debasement, inflation, loss of confidence. The cycle always ends the same way. The mechanism of collapse, here's what most people miss. Reserve currency collapse doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly. Slowly, Trade partners begin settling in alternative currencies. Dollar demand declines marginally. The U.S. runs larger deficits to compensate. More dollars are printed. Inflation rises. Foreign holders sell treasury bonds. Interest rates spike. The U.S. prints more to cover debt payments. The cycle accelerates. Suddenly, a triggering event. Perhaps a failed treasury auction. Perhaps a BRICS currency launch. Perhaps a major oil exporter formally abandoning the dollar. Confidence breaks. Foreign central banks dump dollar reserves simultaneously. The currency collapses. Hyperinflation begins. The gap between slowly and suddenly is closing. We are in the slow phase now. But the sudden phase is visible on the horizon. What happens next when the petrodollar dies? 3 outcomes are possible. The U.S. negotiates a multilateral reserve currency system. The dollar remains important but shares reserve status with the yuan, euro, and possibly a BRICS currency. American living standards decline by 30 to 40% as import prices surge and cheap credit disappears. This is the optimistic scenario. Foreign holders panic sell treasuries. The dollar loses 50 to 70% of its value within months. Inflation exceeds 20% annually. The government responds with capital controls, price controls, and potentially social unrest. This is the historically precedented scenario. The United States uses military force to maintain dollar dominance, potentially triggering conflict with China or Russia. This is the catastrophic scenario. None of these outcomes preserve the system as it exists today. The petrodollar is dying. The only question is whether it dies slowly or suddenly. What you must understand, this isn't about predicting the future. This is about recognizing the pattern. The 7-stage cycle has destroyed every reserve currency for 600 years. The Portuguese real, the Dutch guilder, the British pound. All followed the same path. Ascension, desperation, peak, crack, defiance. Sanctions collapse. United States is in stage 6, approaching stage 7. The mathematics are undeniable. The debt is unsustainable. The deficits are structural. The military enforcement is failing. The trust is broken. You are living through the collapse of the world's reserve currency, not in theory, not in speculation. Right now, in 2025. And here's the truth no one wants to hear. You cannot stop it. You can only prepare for it. Because the petrodollar isn't just a currency system. It's the foundation of your entire economic reality. Your mortgage rate, your grocery bill, your retirement savings, your job. All of it is priced in dollars. And when the dollar's reserve status ends, everything reprices.